Thank you for joining me on this adventure. Your presence means the world to me. Welcome aboard as we set sail on a journey through Chaffee. The Chaffee, officially light tank, was an American light tank used during the later part of World War II. It was also used in post-World War I conflicts, including the Korean War, and by the French in the war in Algeria and the First Indochina War. In British service, it was given the service name Chaffee after the United States Army General Adna Chaffee Jr., who helped develop the use of tanks in the United States Armed Forces. Although the Walker Bulldog was developed as a replacement, MERS were not mostly removed from US and NATO armies until the ERS and remained in service with some third world countries. Turning our focus to development and production history, let's explore its key elements. British combat experience in the North African campaign identified several shortcomings of the Stuart light tank, especially the performance of its 37mm cannon. A 75 gun was experimentally fitted to howitzer motor carriageman tank with a larger turret, and trials indicated that a 75 gun on the light tank development of them was possible. The design was dated though, and the 75 gun reduced storage space. The light tank design, which was initially seen as a replacement, grew in weight to more than 25 short tons, taking it out of the light tank classification, and so was designated as the medium tank. The weight increase without increased power gave it unsatisfactory performance. The program was stopped in March 1943 to allow standardization on a single medium tank, the medium. This prompted the Ordnance Committee to issue a specification for a new light tank, with the same powertrain as them but armed with a 75 gun. In April 1943, the Ordnance Corps, together with Cadillac who manufactured them, started work on the new project, designated light tanked. The power plant and transmission of them were used together with some aspects of that. Efforts were made to keep the weight of the vehicle under 20 tons. The armor was extremely light and was sloped to maximize effectiveness. The turret armor was 25 thick with a 38 thick gun mounted. The glacis plate was 25 thick. Side hull armor thickness varied. The frontal section was 25 thick, but the rear third of the armor, which covered the engine compartment, was only 19. A new lightweight 75 gun was developed, a derivative of the gun used in the Beech-Mitchell bomber. The gun had the same ballistics as the 75mm in use by American tanks, but used a thinly walled barrel and different recoil mechanism. The design featured 16-in tracks and torsion bar suspension, similar to the slightly earlier Hellcat tank destroyer, which itself started in production in July 1943. The torsion bar system was to give a smoother ride than the vertical volute suspension used on most US armored vehicles. At the same time, the chassis was expected to be a standard used for other vehicles, such as self-propelled guns, and specialist vehicles, known together as the Light Combat Team. It had a relatively low silhouette and a 3-man turret. On October 15, 1943, the first pilot vehicle was delivered. The design was judged a success, and a contract for 1,000 was immediately raised by the Ordnance Department. This was subsequently increased to 5,000. Production began in 1944 under the designation light tank. It was produced at 2 sites, from April at Cadillac and from July at Massey Harris. By the time production was stopped in August 1945, 4,731 MERS had been produced. As we enter this new chapter, let's navigate the complexities of service history and unravel its multifaceted nature. The Chaffee was intended to replace the aging and obsolete light tank Stuart, which was used in supplementary roles. Get ready to immerse yourself in the world of World War I as we examine its impact and relevance. European theatre. The first 34 MERS reached Europe in November 1944 and were issued to the US 2nd Cavalry Group mechanized in France. These were then issued to Troop F 2nd Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron and Troop F 42nd Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron, which each received 17 MERS. During the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, these units and their new tanks were rushed to the southern sector. Two of the MERS were detached to serve with the 740th Tank Battalion of the U.S. First Army. Them started to enter widespread use in December 1944, but they were slow in reaching the front-line combat units. By the end of the war, the light tank companies of many armored divisions were still mainly equipped with them Stuart. Some armored divisions did not receive their first MERS until the war was over. Aside from the US Army, the British Army was another main user of the Chaffee during the war, with at least several hundred obtained through the US Lend-Lease program. These saw action mainly in northwestern Europe and the North German Plain, where British forces saw action against German troops. Reports from the armored divisions that received them prior to the end of hostilities were generally positive. Crews liked the improved off-road performance and reliability, but were most appreciative of the 75 main gun, which was a vast improvement over the 37. Them was inferior in armor to German tanks, but the bigger gun at least gave its crews a much better chance to fight back when it was required, especially in infantry support. Them's light armor made it vulnerable to virtually all German tanks, anti-tank guns, and handheld anti-tank weapons. The contribution of them to winning the war in Europe was minor, as too few arrived too late to replace the worn-out arms of the armored divisions. At the end of WWII, the US Army displayed its Chaffees alongside the British Comet tanks and the Soviet IS-3 heavy tank in the Berlin Victory Parade in 1945. Pacific Theater. Let's now turn our attention to Korean War and examine its role within the larger context. Them was virtually the only tank that the US Far East Command could immediately dispatch to the Korean Peninsula at the time of the Korean War. During the same period, there were a total of 4 tank battalions: 71st, 77th, 78th, and 79th under the Far East Command, and each battalion maintained one company composed of MERS for the purpose of defending Japan's narrow road network and bridges. The first battle took place on 10 July 1950, when a company of the 78th Tank Battalion, assigned to the 24th Infantry Division, fought a North Korean tank and destroyed it while losing 2. The 75mm main gun lacked penetration power against the frontal armor of the T-34-85. In addition, the armor of them could be penetrated by the main guns of enemy tanks, artillery, and even anti-tank rifles used by the North Korean military. Moreover, most of the tanks dispatched from Japan had not been repaired for a long time, so turrets and main guns frequently broke down during battles. A company of the 78th Tank Battalion, who first arrived on the Korean Peninsula, suffered heavy damage, with only 2 of the 14 tanks remaining in about a month. This unfavorable situation was resolved in August of the same year when US medium tanks were finally deployed on the Korean Peninsula. All of the tanks units that operated the MERS were replaced with the MA. Afterward, them was given to the reconnaissance squadron under the Tank Battalion or the Infantry Division for most of the period and was used for scouting purposes as it should have been. With our foundation established, it's time to explore non-US service and its relevance to our overarching theme. Like other successful World War II designs, them was supplied to many armies around the globe and was used in local conflicts long after it had been replaced in the US Army by the Walker Bulldog. France employed its MERS in Indochina in infantry support missions, with good results. They employed 10 MERS in the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. In December 1953, 10 disassembled Chaffees were transported by air to provide fire support to the garrison. They fired about 15,000 shells in the long siege that followed before the Viet Minh forces finally overcame the camp in May 1954, almost all being entirely worn out and badly damaged by the time the battle was over. France also deployed them in Algeria, with some variants which fought there carrying an AMX-13 turret modified by France. Some former French and US Chaffees are known to have been passed down to the Army of South Vietnam, where they saw service at least until the Battle of Hoo, with several serving as fixed-gun emplacements outside vital military installations such as air bases. The last time them is known to have been in action was in the Indo-Pakistani War of 1971, where 66 Pakistani Chaffees stationed in East Pakistan, today's Bangladesh, were lost to Indian Army Ts, PTs, and anti-tank teams, being easy prey for the better-equipped invading Indian forces. Although both Iran and Iraq had MERS prior to the Iran-Iraq War, there is no report of their use in that conflict. South Korean Chaffees saw limited service during the Korean War, often performing hit-and-run raids on communist forces. Cambodia, Laos, Japan and Taiwan were four other Asian nations to have operated Chaffees aside from South Vietnam, South Korea and Pakistan. The Greek army received 85 MERS from the US from 1950 until 1970. The MERS initially were organized into tank regiments numbered 392 and 393. In later years, the tank regiments were reorganized in tank battalions with the same numbers. From 1962 till the early 70s, the MERS in tank battalions were replaced with MERS, and the MERS were used to equip independent reconnaissance companies with an additional 121 MERS received from Italy in 1975. From 1991 till 1995, 61 MERS were scrapped due to CFE treaty limitations. The rest are abandoned in or outside military camps, and one is preserved in the Greek Army Tank Museum and is on display outside the village of Metsovo. Get ready for an exciting exploration as we unravel the mysteries of variants and related vehicles. Light Tank Regional Prototype. Tested at Aberdeen Proving Grounds in January 1944. Was eventually standardized as Light Tank Light Tank TIE. Prototype with Continental R975 engine and Spicer torque converter transmission. One vehicle was converted from the original to prototype and tested in October 1944. The vehicle had superior performance compared to them but suffered from transmission reliability problems. Multiple gun motor carriage. Developed from 40mm GMC anti-aircraft gun on extended chassis. Lengthened hull with engine moved to center, twin 40mm Bofors anti-aircraft guns mounted at hull rear. 336 rounds. 904 were ordered in August 1944, but only 285 were completed by the end of the war. 105mm howitzer motor carriage. Developed in 1945. Carried a 105 howitzer, 126 rounds. Was intended to replace the 105mm howitzer motor carriage. 448 ordered, 316 delivered. Saw service in the Korean War. Howitzer motor carriage Guerrilla. Engine moved to the center of hull. 155 howitzer mounted at rear. 250 ordered, 85 produced. Saw service in the Korean War, with some exported to France at multiple gun motor carriage. Had 6 12.7 caliber machine guns mounted in a new designed turret, cargo tractors. Based on that had a torque converter transmission from them Hellcat. Them was a lightened version of that. Had a bulldozer kit installed. Additionally, the Wolfhound prototype armored car was experimentally fitted with an turret. Let's now turn our attention to M116 and examine its role within the larger context. In 1972, the Norwegian army decided to retain 54 of their 123 light tanks as reconnaissance vehicles after they were substantially rebuilt under the designation NM116. It was calculated that the NM116 rebuilding program cost only about a third as much as contemporary light tanks. This program was managed by the firm Eureka. The American firm NAPCO developed an improved power pack based around the Ivert diesel engine used in the armored personnel carrier mated to an Allison MT653 transmission. The original 75mm gun was replaced with a French D900 and 25-90mm low-pressure gun with a coaxial 0.5-inch 12.7mm heavy machine gun. The bow gunner position was eliminated in favor of ammunition stowage. A new fire control system was installed, complete with a Simradov laser rangefinder. Norwegian firms also converted 8mm light tanks into light armored recovery vehicles to support the NM116. The NM116 were retired from service in 1993. In this chapter, we'll be shedding light on other variants and its role in shaping our understanding. The Chilean Army upgunned their MERS in the mid-airs to the IMIOTO 60mm hypervelocity medium support HVMS gun, with roughly comparable performance to a standard 90mm gun. Chile operated this version until 1999. Uruguay continues to use them, modernized with new engines and 76mm guns which can fire armor-piercing, fin-stabilized, discarding Subit APF-SDS rounds. In the mid-airs, in an attempt to improve the anti-tank performance of the vehicle, some French MERS had their turrets replaced with those of the AMX-13 light tank. AMX-13 variants with Chaffee turret also existed. In the late ERS, the JSDF modified a single with 4 Type 64 ACMs in order to improve its anti-tank capabilities. The spotlight now falls on operators as we delve deeper into its details. Former operators 10 second-hand Chaffees captured from the Pakistan Army during the Bangladesh Liberation War. 224 were bought through NATO, 36 were purchased, 32 purchased by the Canadian government in 1947 along with 294 May 76 Shermans. 21 received in ERS from us, 63 were bought through NATO, 34 were purchased, 1254 vehicles were purchased through NATO, 170 were bought through NATO, 180 were purchased, 78 were purchased, 518 were bought through NATO, entered service in 1952, last ones taken out of service by 4 were purchased, 318 in active service from 1956 till 1987. Turrets of retired tanks were fixed in PT chassis purchased through United States, about 50 in use until 1960 to 123 entered service in ERS. Last Chaffees were taken out of service in 132 were purchased, 7 Chaffees assigned to the Recon Company of the 10th BCT, PFTOK during the Korean War. 2 known were on static display in Lingayen, Pangasinan. 16 were bought through NATO. 22 MERS were used for training by the 55th Tank Company of the Army in late 1952 for a temporary time. Later delivered to Taiwan. 52 were purchased 1975. 137 were purchased after conquest of Republic of South Vietnam. 31 were purchased through NATO. Used during IFNI War. 20 were purchased, 238 were bought through NATO, 302 were purchased, 17 upgraded, retired from the armored infantry and replaced by 25 MK in 2018, donated from Brazil, received 2 MERS through Lend-Lease. If you found this video helpful, give it a like and share it with someone who might benefit from it.